My name is Rachel, and I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and truth. I never planned on sharing it publicly, but the weight of silence was crushing me. For 35 years, my life felt like a well-rehearsed play. Same house, same people, same memories, but one unexpected line in my father's will shattered the script. I am telling it now because secrets have a way of poisoning generations if they are left buried. The day it happened, the sun was sharp in the late morning sky. I sat in a cramped leather chair in the office of my father's attorney, waiting for the formal reading of his will. The room smelled of old books and dust, heavy curtains, muffling the traffic from the street below. My sister Claire was beside me, fidgeting with her bracelet, her nails clicking against the silver charm. My mother sat across the table, eyes lowered, her hands folded neatly as if she was at church. The attorney cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began. Most of what he read sounded predictable. Instructions about the house, the savings account, a few sentimental items. Then came the sentence that froze the air. The inheritance will be distributed only after paternity is confirmed by DNA testing of all surviving children. The words echoed in my head like a gavel strike. I remember looking at Claire. Her hand stopped moving, her lips parted, but no sound came out. My mother's face drained of color, her mouth pressing into a thin line, as if she had been expecting this, but hoped it would never be spoken aloud. My own reaction was stranger than I expected. On the outside, I stayed still, gripping the arms of the chair so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Inside, though, my stomach dropped. It was like being dunked into ice water without warning. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. My father had been meticulous, a man who measured his words carefully. If he had put that line in his will, it wasn't paranoia. It was intention. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint tick of a wall clock. The attorney looked at each of us as though he had delivered a bomb and was waiting to see the blast radius. My first thought was, why? Why would my father, a man who valued family above everything, demand something so invasive? My second thought was darker. What exactly did he suspect? Claire whispered, "This isn't necessary, right?" Her voice was thin, almost childlike. I wanted to reassure her, but my own doubts held me back. My mother leaned forward, forcing a tight smile. "It's just legal formality," she said, her voice calm but too practiced. Her eyes darted to the attorney, silently pleading with him to move on. But the damage was done. That single clause had opened a door none of us knew existed. As we left the office, my legs felt heavy, like they were carrying more than my body. I kept replaying my father's voice in my head, though I had never actually heard him say those words while alive. I wondered if he had tried to tell me in subtle ways, moments I brushed aside as paranoia or overthinking. I thought back to arguments I overheard when I was a teenager, muffled through closed doors, ending abruptly whenever I entered the room. At the time, I convinced myself every family had secrets. Now, I wasn't so sure. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the attorney's office. The stale air, the scrape of Claire's bracelet, the look on my mother's face. The more I thought about it, the more I realized my father had left me not just an inheritance, but a puzzle, one he knew would explode if solved. He had been gone only a week, and already his absence was louder than his presence had ever been. I tried to rationalize. Maybe he had doubts but was mistaken. Maybe it was just his way of ensuring fairness, a legal safety net. But deep down, I knew better. My father was a man who despised unnecessary drama. He would never have inserted such a demand unless he had reason. Serious, undeniable reason. And that thought made my chest tighten with dread. I could feel the shift in Claire, too. She barely texted me after the reading, which was unusual. Normally, she would flood my phone with messages about what to wear, what to eat, what she was feeling. Instead, silence. My mother called once, her voice brisk, urging me not to overthink the paperwork. That phrase stuck with me. Overthink the paperwork. It sounded less like reassurance and more like defense. When I looked in the mirror the next morning, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were rimmed red from lack of sleep, my skin pale against the harsh bathroom light. I pressed both hands against the sink, trying to steady my breathing. In that moment, I admitted to myself something I hadn't said out loud. I was afraid of the truth. not just for what it would mean for Claire or for me, but for what it would mean about my mother. Because if the test revealed what my father suspected, it wouldn't just fracture our family, it would rewrite 35 years of history. I didn't know then how devastating that truth would be. I didn't know how loud the silence between my mother and me would grow, or how quickly Claire's world would collapse. All I knew, sitting there in that dim bathroom with my reflection staring back at me, was that a single test had the power to destroy everything we thought was real. The night after the will reading, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled inside me. By the time morning light cut through my blinds, I knew there was no use fighting the questions. To make sense of what my father had done, I needed to revisit everything that had led us here, every quiet sign I had ignored. The attorney's office had been cold, but my house felt colder now. I poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted more bitter than usual, sat at my kitchen table, and let the memories pour in. When I think about my family before that day, I remember the appearances we worked so hard to keep. From the outside, we looked solid. We had the 2-story house with white shutters, the manicured lawn my father insisted on mowing himself, the Sunday dinners where everyone smiled for a moment before retreating back into silence. My sister Claire always looked radiant, the one who drew people in. She had the kind of effortless beauty that made strangers stop her in the grocery store. My mother was polished too, always in neat clothes and careful makeup, like she was performing even in her own living room. My father was quieter, more grounded, the one who believed actions spoke louder than words. And then there was me, the one who tried to stay invisible to keep the peace. I used to believe we were normal. Not perfect, but normal. Families fought, parents argued, siblings clashed. That was what I told myself whenever I noticed how Claire was treated differently. At birthdays, her gifts sparkled while mine felt practical. She got jewelry, designer bags, plane tickets. I got sweaters, work shoes, kitchen gadgets. When I graduated college, my parents gave me a pat on the back and a check to help with rent. When Claire finished the same milestone, she got a car. I told myself it was because she was the youngest, the baby. That was the script my mother repeated every time I hinted at the imbalance. "Don't be jealous, Rachel," she would say. "You're the strong one. Claire needs more." Looking back, it was more than favoritism. It was a pattern. I can still see one Christmas clearly. I had saved up for months to buy my father a leather-bound collector's edition of his favorite novel. When he unwrapped it, his eyes lit up for a second before my mother announced loudly that Claire had painted him something herself. Everyone crowded around her canvas, cooing over her talent, while my gift sat forgotten on the floor. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck on the ceiling years earlier, and wondered if love had always been uneven in our house. Then there were the silences. Not the comfortable kind families fall into when they know each other well, but the sharp silences that cut. I remember walking into the kitchen late one night when I was 16. My parents were whispering furiously, words tumbling over each other like waves. When they saw me, the conversation stopped dead. My mother smiled too brightly, poured me a glass of milk, and asked if my homework was done. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't know it then, but that silence was heavier than anything spoken. Even now, I can picture the look my father gave me sometimes when he thought I wasn't watching. It was as if he wanted to say something, as if words perched on the edge of his tongue, but never made it out. Once, when Claire was about 10 and I was 12, I heard him mutter, "She has your stubborn streak," while looking at me. My mother's reply had been swift and sharp. "Don't start." I didn't understand the weight of that exchange until years later, but the memory still burns. The signs were everywhere, hidden in plain sight. Claire had my mother's coloring, her same pale hair, the same shape to her smile. I had my father's eyes, dark and steady, and his jawline. At family reunions, distant cousins would joke, "Rachel, you're your father's double," while Claire was praised for being a mirror of our mother. Back then, it felt harmless. Now, it feels like the universe had been trying to show me the truth all along. Before the reading of the will, I thought the event would be straightforward. I expected sadness, maybe some tension about property, but nothing more. That morning, I had even joked to myself in the mirror that Dad would leave me his collection of old fishing rods I never learned to use. I thought we would gather, listen, and leave with envelopes in hand. Instead, what we got was the spark that set fire to years of unanswered questions. And even in the hours before that meeting, the signals had been there. My mother called me twice, asking what time I planned to arrive. Her voice was too cheerful, like she was rehearsing normalcy. Claire was quieter than usual when we drove together. She scrolled her phone obsessively, not saying much. I caught her glancing at me once, with something close to fear in her eyes, though she tried to mask it with a half smile. At the time, I thought she was just nervous about the inheritance. Now I know better. It is strange to look back and realize how blind I was. I thought we were simply a flawed family trying to survive grief. I didn't know we were sitting on top of a secret so deep it would split us apart. My father's will wasn't just a legal document. It was a message. A test not of blood alone, but of trust, of truth, of whether the walls we had built as a family could survive the truth that had been waiting for decades. It's easy to look back now and trace the cracks, to see how the pieces were always shifting under our feet, but at the time, I never admitted it. I told myself every family had drama. What I didn't realize was that ours had been built on a fault line, waiting for the right pressure to split it wide open. After the reading of the will, the attorney's words followed me like a shadow. They dragged me into the past, into the moments I had buried, the ones that whispered the truth long before I was willing to hear it. The first time I felt something was wrong was when I was about 8 years old. Claire and I had been playing in the yard when a neighbor walked by. She stopped to chat with my mother, complimented Claire's golden hair and light eyes, then glanced at me and said, "Rachel doesn't look much like her sister, does she?" My mother laughed, but the sound was brittle. "They both take after me in different ways," she replied, a little too quickly. I didn't think much of it then, but I remembered how my father, standing nearby with a rake in his hand, stiffened at the comment. His grip tightened so hard I thought the handle might snap. He didn't say a word. He just kept staring at me with a look I couldn't name. Years later, when I was in high school, I overheard an argument between my parents late at night. Their voices carried down the hall, muffled but sharp. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Truth, timing, the girls. My mother's tone was panicked, my father's voice low and furious. When I stepped into the kitchen for a glass of water, they both froze. My mother forced a smile and asked if I was studying hard for exams. My father kept his back turned. I should have asked questions. I should have pressed, but I didn't. I went back to my room, pretending I hadn't heard anything. That became my habit. Pretend everything was fine, because pretending was easier than facing the possibility that it wasn't. Then there was the summer when Claire was 16 and I was 18. She had borrowed my car without asking, and when I confronted her, she burst into tears, saying Mom told her it was fine. Mom took her side instantly, scolding me for being selfish. "You're older, Rachel," she said. "You should understand." I remember the sting of those words, how they made me feel like I was an outsider in my own family. Dad watched the fight quietly, his jaw tight, and when I stormed off to my room, he followed me. He stood in the doorway, not quite coming inside, and said softly, "Sometimes being right isn't worth the noise." I thought he was telling me to let it go. Now I wonder if he was talking about something else entirely, something deeper he couldn't bring himself to say. It wasn't just favoritism. It was the way my mother guarded Claire, protected her like she was made of glass, while pushing me to be unshakable. If Claire cried, Mom comforted her with tea and blankets. If I cried, Mom told me to toughen up, that life wasn't fair. At the time, I resented her for it. I thought she simply loved Claire more. But now I realize she was protecting not just Claire's feelings, but the secret tethered to her existence. The last few years before Dad passed were full of little signals I ignored. He started keeping journals, locked in his desk drawer. Once, when I accidentally found one left open, I read a few lines. Most of it was about daily routines, but one sentence stuck out. "I can't leave without the truth being known." When he caught me near his desk, he shut the journal quickly and told me it wasn't for me to worry about. His eyes looked tired, burdened. I wanted to ask, but fear pinned my tongue. There were family gatherings where relatives whispered things I was too young to decode. At my cousin's wedding, one aunt leaned into another and murmured something while glancing at Claire. When I asked what they were talking about, they changed the subject so quickly it made my head spin. Later, Dad danced with me during the reception. His grip was firm, almost protective, and he whispered, "No matter what, you'll always be mine." I thought he was being sentimental. Now I know it was something else. Looking back, Claire must have felt it too, even if she never admitted it. She was defensive anytime someone joked about us not looking alike. She laughed too loudly, changed the subject too fast. She clung to Mom like a lifeline, while I found myself standing closer to Dad without even realizing it. We were like two halves of a puzzle that didn't quite fit, pretending the edges matched because no one wanted to say otherwise. I remember one Thanksgiving when the tension finally slipped into the open, though not completely. My uncle, a little drunk, teased that Claire must have been the milkman's child. The room went still. Mom's smile vanished, and Dad slammed his glass down so hard the table shook. "Enough?" he barked, his voice like a whip. No one laughed. Claire looked stricken, and I wanted to sink into the floor. The subject never came up again, but the silence afterward spoke volumes. All those years, the truth lived in the spaces between words, in the way my mother's eyes darted away during certain conversations, in the way my father lingered near me, but kept a distance from Claire he couldn't explain. I see it clearly now, but back then, I only felt the weight of something I couldn't name pressing on all of us. The DNA test wasn't just a sudden shock. It was the inevitable eruption of years of buried tension. My father had left us with a riddle because he knew we wouldn't face the truth on our own. And as much as I hated him for forcing it into the open, a part of me also understood. He had carried the secret long enough. Now it was our turn to face what had always been there, hiding in plain sight. The day of the DNA test felt heavier than a funeral. It wasn't grief this time. It was dread, the kind that pressed against my chest and made every breath shallow. The clinic was small and too clean, with the faint scent of disinfectant lingering in the air. The waiting room chairs squeaked under our weight, lined up in perfect rows as if mocking how organized destruction could be. Claire sat across from me, twisting a tissue into knots. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled no matter how tightly she tried to fold them into her lap. Mom sat beside her, stiff-backed, her lips pressed together in a straight line that looked carved into stone. She hadn't said much all morning, but her silence spoke louder than any excuse she could have offered. When the nurse called our names, my heart slammed against my ribs. The hallway leading to the testing room felt endless, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The nurse was gentle, almost cheerful, but her calm demeanor only made the moment feel more surreal. She swabbed my cheek first, the cotton brushing against my skin like nothing more than a whisper. Simple, quick, ordinary. But I knew the result of that tiny action could unravel 35 years of my family's history. Claire went next. She tried to smile at me, but her lips wobbled, betraying the fear she was carrying. Mom held her hand tightly as if that grip could change the outcome. When it was over, the nurse assured us we would be contacted once the results were processed. It was routine for her, but for us it was the axis on which our world spun. We left the clinic in silence, each of us carrying unspoken thoughts we didn't dare share. The wait for the results was torture. Every day felt stretched thin, like time itself had slowed to watch us suffer. Claire avoided me, burying herself in errands and long drives. I caught glimpses of her car passing my house, as though she wanted to check on me without actually stepping inside. Mom called constantly, her voice brittle, urging me to stay calm and reminding me that families survive worse. I never asked what she meant by worse. My gut told me I didn't want to know. When the call finally came, I felt the blood drain from my face. The clinic asked us to come in together for the results. That alone was enough to make my stomach twist. If it were simple, they would have told us over the phone. We drove in near silence. Claire stared out the window, her reflection pale against the glass, while Mom clenched the steering wheel as if holding it too tightly could keep everything from spinning apart. I sat in the back, gripping my knees, repeating one thought over and over. Please let it not be true. The results were delivered in a plain folder, the kind that looked too ordinary to hold something so destructive. The doctor spoke in a careful, even tone, but I barely heard his words. My eyes went straight to the printed lines. My name, my father's name, match confirmed. Relief flickered for a second, until my eyes fell on Claire's page. Not a match. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. I glanced at her, but she was already staring at Mom, her face crumpling as if the floor had given way beneath her. Mom broke before Claire did. She covered her face with both hands, a sound escaping her throat that was half sob, half confession. I never wanted it to come to this, she whispered, her voice muffled. Claire shook her head violently. You lied to me, she choked out. My whole life, you lied to me. Her voice cracked, and for the first time I saw her not as the favored child, but as someone shattered, lost in the rubble of the truth. I wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, but my own anger surged too fast. Whose child is she then? I demanded, my voice sharper than I had ever heard it. Mom's shoulders slumped, and she looked older than I had ever seen her. It was one mistake, she whispered. One mistake 35 years ago. I thought it was over. I thought your father would never know. Her words spilled like poison, filling the sterile room until it felt suffocating. The silence that followed was unbearable. Claire sobbed openly, her hands shaking as she clutched the edge of the table. I sat frozen, the anger in me warring with a strange grief I couldn't name. My mother's betrayal wasn't just about Claire's identity. It was about every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner where she smiled at us as if nothing was wrong. It was about the years my father carried this weight alone, quietly shaping his will to make sure the truth would one day be known. The drive home was worse than the clinic. None of us spoke. Claire sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window with tears streaming down her face. Mom gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. I sat in the back again, but this time the silence felt like a wall none of us could climb. Every stoplight seemed to last forever, the car filled with nothing but the sound of our breathing and the faint hum of the engine. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, just as I had so many times before, but this time I couldn't pretend. The truth was out. There was no going back. My father had been right. He couldn't leave without ensuring the truth came to light. And now that it had, we were left to pick up the pieces of a family that had been built on lies. The fallout after the results came back was immediate and brutal. The moment we walked back into the house, the walls seemed to close in on us. Claire stormed upstairs without a word, slamming her bedroom door so hard the picture frames rattled on the hallway walls. Mom lingered in the foyer, clutching her purse like it could shield her from what she had unleashed. I stood frozen near the doorway, unsure whether to scream, cry, or just collapse. The silence was unbearable, the kind that buzzes in your ears and makes your skin crawl. Finally, I broke it. You've been lying to us for 35 years, I said, my voice sharp, shaking. Mom's face crumpled as she tried to answer. Rachel, please, it wasn't supposed to come out like this. I was trying to protect everyone. Protect. The word cut through me like glass. Protect who? I snapped. Protect Claire from the truth? Protect yourself from shame? Or protect Dad from knowing what you did? She flinched at that, her hand pressing against her chest as if my words had struck her physically. For once, she didn't have the polished, calm mask she always wore. She looked small, fragile, almost cornered. Upstairs, Claire's sobs echoed faintly through the floorboards, raw and jagged. I wanted to go to her, to hold her and tell her she was still my sister no matter what. But the fury inside me was too sharp, too fresh. Instead, I found myself pacing the living room, my heart pounding. Memories of birthdays, holidays, and family dinners replayed in my head like cruel jokes. Every smile from Mom now felt like a lie. Every time she told me to be strong while cradling Claire like a treasure felt like a cover for something I hadn't understood. I turned on her again. Did Dad know? I demanded. Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly. He found out years ago. He never forgave me, but he chose to stay for you both. He didn't want the family to break apart. The admission made my stomach twist. My father had carried this secret in silence, choosing to let us live in an illusion rather than shatter everything. I thought about the journals I'd seen locked in his desk, the way he sometimes looked at me with a heaviness I couldn't name. He had been preparing for this moment, ensuring that even in death, the truth couldn't stay buried. So he knew, I whispered, my voice breaking. And he left it to me to find out this way. Mom stepped forward, reaching out as if to touch my arm, but I pulled back sharply. Don't, I warned. You don't get to comfort me right now. Claire's door opened then, and she came down the stairs, her face streaked with tears. Her eyes were red, swollen, but blazing with anger. She pointed at Mom. You lied to me my whole life. You let me believe I was his daughter. You let me believe I belonged. Her voice cracked, and the pain in it pierced through me. Mom sobbed openly now. You do belong, she pleaded. You are my daughter. That's what matters. But Claire shook her head violently. No, it's not enough. You let me love a man as my father when you knew the truth. You let him raise me knowing I wasn't his. Do you know what that feels like? The words tore through the room, leaving all of us raw. I wanted to defend Claire, but I also wanted to scream that I had been betrayed too. Instead, I just stood there, tears burning in my eyes, caught between two people I loved but could no longer trust in the same way. That night was the longest of my life. None of us slept. Claire locked herself in her room. Mom sat on the couch all night, clutching a blanket, staring blankly at the darkened television screen. I stayed in my room, lying awake, listening to the occasional creak of the house, the muffled sobs that still came from Claire's room. I realized then that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, word had already spread. Family has a way of leaking secrets faster than water through a cracked pipe. Relatives started calling, their voices full of shock, curiosity, judgment. Some wanted details, others wanted gossip. I shut my phone off after the 10th call, unable to handle the scrutiny. At breakfast, Claire refused to sit at the table. She grabbed a cup of coffee and left without a word. Mom tried to act as if things were normal, buttering toast, pouring orange juice, but her hands shook so badly that the knife clattered against the plate. We'll get through this, she whispered, mostly to herself. I couldn't take it. Stop pretending, I snapped. Nothing about this is normal. Nothing about this is survivable if you keep hiding. My words silenced her. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She just lowered her eyes, tears dripping onto her untouched toast. The house felt less like a home and more like a battlefield after that. Every glance carried accusation. Every silence carried blame. Claire avoided me, avoided Mom, avoided the memories of the family she thought she had. Mom moved through the house like a ghost, her once polished presence reduced to a shell of guilt. And me? I was caught in the middle, torn between anger at my mother and heartbreak for my sister. The truth had done exactly what Dad must have known it would. It had split us apart. Weeks passed, but the storm inside our house never settled. Claire moved out within days, packing her things into boxes with shaking hands. I tried to help her, but she barely looked at me. She was polite, distant, like I was a stranger. When she closed the trunk of her car and drove away, the silence she left behind was deafening. I stood in the driveway long after her taillights disappeared, feeling like I had just watched the end of an era. Mom and I remained in the same house, but it felt like we were living on opposite sides of a canyon. We spoke only when necessary, and even then, our words were clipped, drained of warmth. She cooked less, slept less, aged faster in front of my eyes. I caught her staring at the family portraits on the wall more than once, her face drawn with regret. But she never took them down, never replaced them, as though leaving them there was her form of punishment. I thought about Dad constantly. Every time I opened a drawer or walked past his old chair, I wondered how long he had carried the truth alone. He must have known the damage it would cause, yet he still chose to reveal it after his death. I couldn't decide if that made him cruel or courageous. Maybe both. He had spared us the confrontation while he lived, but he had also forced us to face reality when he was gone. In his own way, he left us not just his possessions, but his final lesson. The truth always rises, no matter how deep you bury it. Claire and I spoke again eventually, though not in the same way as before. She called me one night, her voice soft and hesitant. "Do you still see me as your sister?" she asked. The question cut me open, but the answer was simple. "You'll always be my sister," I told her. "Blood doesn't decide that." She cried quietly on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I felt the bond we had built since childhood flicker back to life. But it wasn't the same. It never would be. Trust, once broken, doesn't return untouched. It comes back scarred. Mom tried to explain herself one more time. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. "I was young," she said. "I made a mistake, and I spent the rest of my life trying to protect everyone from it. I never wanted to hurt you, Rachel. I never wanted to hurt Claire." I listened, but the words no longer had power. Excuses don't rebuild bridges once they've burned. What mattered was not the past, but what we chose to do with what was left. In time, I stopped searching for someone to blame. Blame kept me chained to the pain. I realized that if I wanted to move forward, I had to accept the truth without letting it define me. My father had taught me resilience, even in silence. My mother, despite her mistakes, taught me that lies only multiply pain. And Claire, shattered as she was, reminded me that identity isn't determined by DNA, but by the love we choose to give each other. The inheritance that had started it all felt meaningless by then. Money, property, objects, none of it could mend the fracture in our family. What mattered was honesty. What mattered was learning from the wreckage, so the cycle wouldn't repeat in the next generation. If my father's last act was to reveal the truth, then my responsibility was to carry it forward without shame. Looking back, I see the story of my family as a warning. Secrets are heavy. They may stay hidden for years, even decades, but eventually they demand to be uncovered. And when they do, they don't just change the present, they rewrite the past. My family will never be what it once was, but maybe that's the point. Maybe we weren't meant to live in illusions. Maybe the truth, however painful, is the only foundation worth building on. So this is the lesson I carry with me. Silence is not protection, and lies are not love. If you're holding on to a secret, ask yourself whether the weight of it will one day crush the people you're trying to protect. My father understood that in the end, and it cost him years of quiet suffering. I don't want to repeat that mistake. And if you've stayed with me through this story, I hope it stays with you too. Family is not defined by blood alone, but by honesty, by trust, by the courage to face what's real. If you believe in stories that dig beneath the surface, stories that challenge what we think we know about family and truth, then stay with me. Subscribe so we can continue to explore these raw, complicated, and deeply human journeys together.